hunting opportunities to bow hunters. Because there was a fee associated at some point, some people judged him as just trying to capitalize on the hunting market and turning hunting into a rich man's sport. Now, I gave him a fair interview. I want everybody to listen to the whole thing and judge it for yourself. But without further ado, here is the truth about the masked deer service. All right, another episode of Hunt Suburbia, sitting in my garage here with special guest Dan Wolf, a.k.a. Tickman Dan. Dan, thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, Pat. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to talk with you about deer and ticks today.
Yeah, deer, ticks, but first we're going to talk about, we got a lot to talk about. We'll talk about the masked deer service, because you and I talked on the phone for a little bit. That's an interesting business that you started years ago, and I know there was a little bit of controversy around it, so I'd love to talk about masked deer service. And before we get into it, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm always thinking about new business ideas, and I've thought about something similar to what you did with mass deer service and across the country, where private landowners can register their land on an app, and people who don't have access to private spots can sign on kind of like Airbnb and rent it for a day if they want to. You can even load, trail cam pictures of the bucks that are on your property there, and then your property, if they have big bucks, is more expensive for a one-day lease or a week lease or whatever you want to pay for it, right? I've thought about that, hash it out with some buddies. It's just, too much for me to get into, and you've been through it a little bit. You hashed it out. You did it in Massachusetts, similar. Why don't we talk about what you did and how you started that?
Sure. And, it certainly was a result of trends and population growth. And I call it the phenomenon of suburban deer populations and suburban deer hunting. Mm-hmm. So it's not the traditional sense of or the traditional way of hunting by any means. And I never grew up as a youngster. My dad never took me out hunting. Mm-hmm. He was sort of involved with other things in the business world and in the healthcare world. So I got involved with hunting later in life. I didn't even shoot a gun, I don't think, until I was about 27 or 28 years old.
It's a big thing with suburban kids. Grow up in the suburbs, you didn't grow up hunting and you learn how to do it somewhere else down the road.
Right. When I took a job with my cousin out in western New York in the Elmira, Ithaca area. And
a lot of deer there.
A lot of deer there, and hunting is a way of life. I mean, I remember them canceling school on the opening day of gun season.
Yep.
And so it was a school holiday, and kids went out with their parents, and that's the tradition. Dad takes out Junior or his daughter, and they go in the woods and they have a great experience and they look for a buck.
Yep.
And a lot of the times they don't see deer or they don't take the does, and they're looking for these trophies. But the experience is really important, so I value that. But when I moved back into the Boston area, oh gosh, it had to be in the early 90s. I was hooked. I mean, once I went hunting out in western New York and I was able to grab my first deer, I think was a 3-pointer, but it might as well have been a giant, at that point. It was so exciting, and I remember just never really losing that enthusiasm.
You shot him with a rifle?
Shot him with a 12 gauge.
Oh, 12 gauge.
Yeah, shotgun. In Chemung County at that time, they actually did not have a rifle season.
Huh.
So we had a shotgun season. They've since changed that, and I haven't been back to that area in many years, but there's rifle season now. So I was able to take that with the shotgun because I didn't even own a bow and I didn't do any bow hunting. So I got involved with it that way. And when I moved back into the Boston area, it just so happened the timing was good because the deer populations were starting to get really, the numbers were getting really high.
What year was this?
This was probably, I'm going to say 92 or 93.
Yeah.
And it's hard to remember. That's a long time ago. So it's almost 30. Well, it's more than 30 years ago. So I kind of was, sick of driving back to New York for only a couple of days of hunting for the year. And so I was exploring the opportunities around here, and I knew a couple of people that had been sort of quietly hunting in some of these more affluent suburban areas, particularly Dover, Mass, Sherburne, Medfield, Concord, Carlisle. And at that time, the populations were decent, but began growing very rapidly. So, I mean, I can remember, maybe 20 some odd years ago, and I was telling somebody this yesterday, if we didn't see 8 to 12 deer every time we went out, whether it was on the way in, jumping them from the stand on the way out, or driving home, it was kind of a slow day.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. So, we had ample opportunities, and if you were lucky enough to get permission on some of these private spots, a lot of people became spoiled very quickly.
Yeah.
So I consider myself to be a very spoiled, a spoiled hunter in that sense.
Right.
But nonetheless, it was an opportunity. There was an opportunity there, and I just kind of had to figure that out. What was that opportunity? What could get me out in the woods more?
Yeah. And now most of these towns were bow only, probably, right? Or is it like there's not much area where you can hunt with a gun anyway, or what is it like?
No, I mean, we were finding properties that were, 4, 5 plus acres. One of the first properties I hunted on was a 35-acre piece, abutting a 7-acre piece, abutting a 55-acre piece, and we just expanded that way. And fortunately for me, I'm somebody that likes to do networking. I've been involved with sales all my life. So the process I was honing my process, but at the same time, it came to me more naturally. So, I was very industrious in my methods of prospecting, organizing, follow up,
okay, so
and my sales pitch.
You're starting to talk about the formation of Mass Deer Service, but what was it that made you want to start that? Did you first just ask for some permission and privately get your own hunting grounds, and then you're like, hey, maybe I can turn it into a business? Why don't you talk about like what led to turning it into an actual...
Right, and we can talk about that, this is all the good stuff. But after Mass Deer Service had some foothold in these suburban settings, we began to get some negative feedback, mostly from other hunters.
All those guys who have had those areas to themselves for years.
Exactly.
Those honey holes, right?
Exactly. And back then, I can tell you, the presence of the environmental police was minimal. I don't even think I interacted with an EPO probably for the first 15 years that we were doing this.
Yeah.
So it was, it wasn't like it was today as far as the chances of running into an officer and finding out that you've done something wrong, or that they may be thinking that you've done something wrong and very adamant about it, and then having to prove yourself in another setting. So back to your question, it was basically a step-by-step process. So initially, it was my own selfish goal.
Yeah.
Find good places to hunt.
Move back here from New York. You're hooked on hunting.
Exactly. What can I do to hunt more myself? And there was a couple things. One, get the spots, and 2, become a bow hunter. Because relying just on shotgun during a 2-week season and muzzleloader, it limits my ability to get out there, because a lot of spots that people are uncomfortable with guns, and they're not necessarily the most ideal spots for guns.
Not to mention, in Massachusetts, those seasons start after the rut. You might get some late rut action, but it's like all the best action's in November. You gotta learn to shoot a bow.
That's true. So first of all, I went out and I started to look at some of these areas. Now, it's a lot easier to do it now, and I've got my own techniques down, which is basically now as I get older, I'm networking better, and I come into contact with friends of friends and people that are more established and might have bigger pieces of property. But back when I was, in my late 20s and in my 30s, we don't know people that own mansions with 20 acres. So we have to get to them. And that was really the biggest challenge. I've had so many doors slammed in my face, You walk up, you want to inquire about hunting on their property, and people back then were a lot less tolerant of this type of inquiry.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like it'd be the opposite way.
No. I mean, this is Massachusetts. We can't forget that. We have a lot of people that are anti-hunting or animal rights people. And
and it's just because they don't know. They don't really understand.
Yeah, and they don't care. They see you as they have an image, a stereotype of a hunter. I tried not to fit that stereotype. So I would always dress well. I would always be presentable. First thing I did was try to gain credibility by mentioning mutual friends that we might know in these neighborhoods, but also to get a business card. And eventually I had the website up. And, the timing was perfect on this, because what happened was the deer populations increased. We had a lot more tolerance from the landowners. I mean, I've had people, these are the conditions. I don't want to see anybody dragging a deer out. I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to know you're there. If you get a deer, call us, bring it out in the dark, or let us know so we don't look out the window. But we want to get rid of some of these deer because they were starting to experience what we call in the sales world as pain. Yeah. And the pain was mostly in their wallets. And if
shrubs getting eaten, trees getting rubbed and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and mainly it was because population densities started to climb from, 6 to 8 deer per mile into upwards of 25 to 30 per mile, and even higher in pockets in some of these areas with conservation woodlands and town forests and so forth. So, first of all, I was being selfish. Second of all, my friends and acquaintances became interested when I was successful in gaining properties.
And probably after you started killing a couple big bucks.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that came later, because here's one of the, I guess, fundamental issues that I would have with, again, who I would call traditional hunters or traditionalists. I was never that way. I was excited to be outdoors. I was excited to be hunting. And for years, I didn't care if it was a giant buck. I didn't go buck hunting. I went deer hunting.
Yep.
And a lot of people disagreed with that because they had this, this idea in their head, possibly, that I was, I'd go out in the woods and we'd have tags and we'd just mow down anything, skippy, spike, big buck, doe, whatever it was.
And they're afraid you're going to turn the population around.
Right.
And wipe them out.
I was accused of wiping out all the deer in Wayland once. I mean,
the Wayland Massacre.
From a guy who ran a farm and a store.
Yeah.
Who banned me from his farm store forever because Mass Deer Service he used to see deer on his farmland and now he doesn't. And at that time I had, I think, 2 properties in Wayland.
Yeah.
So this was just what I was dealing with. So we became, or I became, more successful in getting written permission from these landowners.
But to be fair, when you formed the company, right, you were... your service is to remove deer.
Exactly.
Right? Your goal was to go in there and decrease the population a little bit because they're over the holding.
No, not just a little bit. That was it.
Yeah.
People wanted the deer.
So the guys
gone.
in Wayland probably was like, well, he sees like that your service is to remove deer from properties. They're way overpopulated, and he was, for whatever reason, I'm sure you probably took 3 or 4 deer. Out of Wayland, and at least maybe 8, but you didn't wipe out the population there. And that guy was using you as a kind of a scapegoat.
Exactly, which a lot of people did. So we can get into more of the negative stuff in a minute, but at this point, I didn't form the company. I wasn't taking money from anybody. This was purely self-motivated and my ambition alone. I mean, I had a couple of hunting friends at the time, but it was mostly my stuff. And you know what? I just spent, this is probably what led to my ultimate divorce. Was I had little kids at the time, but I was never home. And when they became big enough to come with me, they did, but then they kind of grew out of it. They never really were too interested. My younger son, I have two sons now. They're 25 and 23 at this point. But my younger son did take a deer with me, and it was very great, but he kind of grew out of that. But most of this was just motivation on my own. And I was just, I didn't have nearly any of the tools that we have nowadays to be able to prospect, what I call prospect for properties. So I would spend my time driving around, identifying houses, getting addresses. I didn't have satellite maps. I didn't have
You're like a
plot
private
plan.
investigator.
Yeah. People would come out and say, "What the hell are you doing here? Get out of here!" And I was just like, "Well, I'm on the road. I'm just, I wanted to talk with you."
You want some Tupperware?
Yeah. So we would, or I would go out, especially in the fall on a weekend. I'd drive around because I knew people were home. There's no COVID at this time, so people were home raking leaves or out in the yard doing yard work, and Sundays were the best. And I soon found out that if I could get in front of a prospect and the property was suitable, meaning it met all the criteria, setbacks and this and that, I was like 50% closer, which is great. I mean,
if you're in sales, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been in sales all my life. So,
and renewals are the most important part of it.
Right. Well, people don't. Yeah, I told somebody the other day that in sales, the real work begins after the sale.
Maintaining the relationship.
Yeah, just living up to what you're expected to do.
Yep.
So, we Mass Deer Service, or myself at the time, I would consider it a nuisance deer removal program. And so I started to get written permission from these properties, primarily in Dover and Sherborne to begin with, and then it branched out all through the Zone 10 area. I've had properties far north in other zones, but mainly Zone 10, as far north as Raleigh, Dunstable, and as far as south as Duxbury.
Yeah.
I tried for a brief period to go out into Connecticut and Rhode Island, but it just became too cumbersome for me with family and work and all that stuff. So we've really focused on Zone 10 and really a lot of the properties in between. So I always say we, but I became successful in getting these properties on board. And then all of a sudden, people wanted to be my friend. People wanted to know, hey, you going out? Let's go. Can I go with you? And that continued on for a couple of years, and I ended up having a core group of friends at the time that were instrumental in helping me, because you know how it goes. You got to scout a property. You got to get cameras out. You got to put up a stand. I mean, I had not experienced hunting as a youngster or a young person using hang-ons or climbers or anything like that. So my first tree stand was a ladder stand, and I've stuck with it. We need help. I need help. So these guys were like, if I help this guy, then maybe I can get on these properties, which happened. And eventually I ended up managing, this is kind of the foundation for Mass Deer Service before I officially started it. We had 37 guys at one point. And so now this is logistical.
37 guys that were helping you, or that were part of the group of allowed hunters, or both?
Both.
Yeah.
And so what we would do initially is we would pay dues. I turned it into a club.
Yep.
So we would pay dues. And every year it was a couple $100 a year. And I remember once taking some of the dues money, and I went to Dick's. This is years and years ago. They had these Remington Ultra Mag tree stands, which I loved. I still love. I still have some. They stopped making them. But these stands were lightweight. One person could easily set this, carry in all their gear and the pole saws and all that stuff. They broke down really small, so you could throw a couple of them in the trunk of your car. I think I was driving a Honda Accord at the time. So, we'd stuff deer in the trunks. And I mean, it was the good old days. So I remember going to Dick's, and they had 17 of these stands left. And they were originally selling for like $180. I said, I want to take all of them. I got them for $70 a piece. Took all of them, and I started to accumulate tree stands. from that point on.
So you're using the dues money and putting them up as part of the assets of the company, and anybody part of the club can use the stands.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And also, I started a website, massdeerservice.com, and I had flyers and brochures and business cards and that kind of stuff, so that when I went up to a house, I could hand them a flyer, I could hand them a business card, I could direct them to the website, and they were like, wow, how does this all work? So I started to think about, well, you know what, there's some liability issues here potentially. Now these guys are graciously paying me dues.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could turn this into a business. And that's sort of when the light bulb went off, and I said, let me see if I can monetize this, because I'm losing a lot of money every year, with my own money that I put in, and $200 is just not enough. Because we also had, which was really cool, we had an online registration system with all of the written permission addresses of all the properties.
Yep.
And if you wanted to hunt a property, you had to log in with your own, dedicated username and password.
Yeah.
And you could reserve one of these spots, but only within 24 hours.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like an app idea, but before apps, were a mainstream thing, you did it on a website.
Right. And
Yep.
so, John Smith could log in and say, I want to hunt on 123 Main Street in Dover tomorrow morning. Okay, no one's there, I'm booked. I want to do it in the afternoon, booked. And so I would have an idea of who was there, when, if anybody needed help. If we didn't hear from somebody, we could, go to that location. And then there were comments that we could use to identify, what are the weather conditions? What kind of deer did you see? Did you get one? What was any behavior, of note to record? And so we could use that information down the road in the next year. Say, okay, well, the first week of December, 18 people in the group got bucks. So now we know, that's
so
a
at
good time
this
to go.
point, when you started the website, for early days on the website, how many properties did you have permission on?
Oh gosh, it probably, when I came to the realization that I could monetize this thing, it was somewhere between 70 and 100. Now, mind you, not all of them had stands on them.
Right.
And some of them were what I would term or characterize as proximity only. Because of the 500-foot setback, we had to have permission from sometimes multiple neighbors.
Right.
So legitimately, we probably had, out of those 70 or 80, maybe 35 stands or 35 locations. Some properties had more than one stand, too.
Yeah.
So it varied.
Now, as you were signing up these properties and you're getting them to allow you guys to hunt there, did you tell them, I'm going to have a group of guys, I'm vetting them all, and they're all going to be able to hunt here, and that's got to be part of the deal? Or how did that work?
Yeah, that evolved from the whole process. So what we would do, there was, some of you guys may know Brian Visco, great guy. He used to own TP Archery up in Acton. And he's been a friend of mine for a long, long time, and a past member. There was a process. So what I said to my guys, much to their dismay, your free ride is basically over. You can now apply to become eligible for the network through this process. And of course, there's a very, very close group of guys that I hunt with that always are welcome in any of my stands. And I still maintain this group today. So we have about, including myself, maybe 5 or 6 of us that, I do all my work, but it's all for me and them. And so, they don't have to worry about bothering me in a stand.
None of the liability, none of the business formation, none of the backlash.
Right. We're just our little group.
Yep.
And, I love those guys. So I decided, one of them is a lawyer. And I said, listen, I need to get this all legit and legal. And I looked up under the Recreation Use Laws, Chapter 21, Section 17C of the Massachusetts General Laws. It's called the Recreation Use Law. And that was a good bit of credibility and ammunition for us when trying to secure properties, because a lot of people want to know about if they're liable, if somebody, falls out of their tree on their arrow or shoots themselves with their gun.
Yeah.
Are they liable?
Or shoots a jogger, as so many
Yeah.
people think you're gonna shoot me, you're gonna shoot my dog.
I'm going to shoot a horse.
No.
So so basically that rule says as long as there's no money going in either direction,
Yep.
you're not liable.
Yeah, and that's on the typical now, what they have on the Mass Fish Hunt website. It's
Yes.
a thing you can print out to give to
Yeah.
landowners, and you both sign it, and it
Yeah, you can do that. I created all of my own contracts and forms
Right.
With my lawyer buddy. So we created 3 types of documents. One was a code of ethics, sort of a outline of what behavior is expected from each hunter. And that just covers my butt when it comes to how they behave on a particular property or any property.
Yeah.
They are required to abide by the rules of the state, just like anybody else.
And you want them to. You're a sportsman too.
Of course.
Yeah. There might be some misconceptions about you from Mass Deer Service and all the backlash and stuff that happened, but you are a sportsman. Like, it wasn't up there just for bullshit to cover your ass.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you and I know that, but there were a lot of outsiders that didn't consider what I was doing to be very sportsmanlike. And I can tell you, I can give you some examples in a minute.
All right, here's a little tip that kind of flies under the radar, but it's super important to pay attention to. You have to keep your wives and your girlfriends happy during hunting season. I mean, you have to keep them happy all year long, but you might as well do something a little bit extra during hunting season to butter them up and maybe buy yourself some extra time in the woods. And what I've always found that works well is buying wine. My wife loves wine. I love wine. So it's one of those gifts that I get her some wine and I also partake in it and enjoy it. And we always buy Heron Hill wine, since my buddy is the vineyard manager over there and does a great job. And the owner of that winery, they're out of the Finger Lakes. He's a big hunter, and his wines specifically pair well with game meat. So my favorite is the Eclipse Red. That pairs really great with venison. They have a game bird red that pairs well with your favorite game bird. But what I do is I buy my wife a case at the beginning of the season, and if we go through it, which we usually do, I'll buy her another case in the middle of the season, and it really goes a long way. They ship to most states in the Northeast. There's a couple they don't, so just check the website. Vermont's one of them, unfortunately, but Massachusetts, New York, New Hampshire, Maine, all those are good states. Get on there, check out their wines. It's heronhill.com, and they have a special code for Hunt Suburbia listeners. So if you want to support us, please support our sponsors. And I mean, this is a great partner that is just going to make your wives and girlfriends happy. You're going to love the wine. So please get on there and support them. Use code HS5 for an additional 5% off at checkout. Now, if you buy 6+ bottles of wine, they already have a volume discount on there of 10%. And you put in HS5 at checkout, you'll get an additional 5%. So that's 15% off. Plus, you get free shipping for anything over 6 bottles. If you buy a case, that's 12 bottles for you mathematicians out there. They have a volume discount of 15%, and you'll get an extra 5%, so 20% off total if you use code HS5 at checkout. So please get on there, support them, get some wine for yourself and your wife, buy some extra time in the woods, and enjoy it.
So we created these 3 documents. One is a code of ethics that the hunter would sign. One is a waiver of liability, and the other was a non-compete, non-disclosure. So I did not want John Smith as part of my group to break from the group and then go knock on the door because they've established a good relationship now with the owner and say, hey, let me get my own permission and sort of usurp or undermine what I've done.
Yep.
And that was a period of 5 years under contract. and from the time they broke off with me. And
Right.
of course, they were required under the contract not to go out and tell everybody else where I had permission.
And I've read some stuff online. You know, I went back and researched, tried to find like old forums and stuff that was talking about your service, and that seemed to be one of the big complaints. Was, oh, he's got this non-compete for 5 years. He's hogging all the properties, and it's for 5 years. I mean, from a business standpoint, as an entrepreneur, you were making sure that all the work that you were doing, and it's a lot of work,
Oh yeah.
doesn't just, get blown up in your face. You were just protecting all the hard work that you were doing.
Yeah, but you got to remember, I don't make the decision on what somebody does on their own property. So we defer to the landlords. The landlords can do whatever they want.
Right.
I mean, if they
And,
say,
and most people, don't really know, but non-competes, they're kind of meant to, scare away people, but they're really hard to enforce. In a court of law,
That's true.
like it's hard to actually enforce it. It's meant to. Most 95% of the people aren't going to mess with a non-compete, but
yeah, I mean, but
and
it's
the
just
cat's out of the bag there.
sort of saying beforehand, listen, I do a lot of work here.
Yep.
If we don't have a relationship anymore, just be
Yeah.
reasonable and don't cut me out, because
And no matter how many properties you had, there's thousands and thousands of properties that are untapped.
that's true. That's true.
People can just go do the work.
Well, the turnover, or I guess if that's the right term, every year occurs. There's a percentage of the properties that no matter what I do, I'm always going to lose.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or people move,
stuff
and they
happens.
sell their house. And,
People die. People move.
Yeah.
I'm going through a cycle now where my original properties, I'm getting a lot of people getting, much older and just dying, and it's sad because I talked to a friend of mine who was my second property ever over in Dover. The poor guy's got lung cancer, and now he's got melanoma that's spread, and he's 82 years old, or in his early 80s. And I said,
You've got a friendship with them now.
yeah. I said, I've known you for 30 years now, and it's very upsetting because he's a great guy and he's always been good to me, and he gets it. So so we had these documents, and then I would arrange, sometimes in group format, for these interviews up at TP Archery. And Brian, he was a pro staffer, he was an archery instructor, he had the indoor range. We would then evaluate each hunter. I did at one point go to a online-based background check, like I think it's been verified.
Yeah.
For some of the guys, just to make sure they weren't, too crazy.
Felons and
Exactly. So, this is all to be used for the procurement of properties. Because when you come in, I use this as an example, and I don't want to offend anybody, but if some guy comes in with flannel and a big belly and he knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I saw a big deer on your property. Can I kill him?" The landowner is going to be less likely to be receptive to that versus myself coming in nicely dressed with business card, with a brochure, with a website, with a vehicle all lettered up, and saying that, here, I'm going to get permission for myself or one of my quote-unquote assignees
yeah.
to access your property for the purposes of removing deer.
Right.
And it seemed to be much more effective that way.
Yeah.
But back to the interview, we'd evaluate their equipment, because Brian is a bow tech.
So they'd have to bring whatever they're going to hunt with them.
Exactly. Field points for the proficiency portion of it.
Yep.
But
Okay, so then you would have them shoot,
Of
make
course.
sure that they were good shots.
Of course. So we'd go to the range. We'd have their equipment, and it was good for Brian too, because if he did discover some potential
Get some business.
problem,
Yep.
he would get business, and people, I joke with him, but people like him, which I scratch my head.
As
Jeez.
opposed to you?
Yeah. So we'd evaluate the equipment, their form, and their proficiency. And it was a standard proficiency test. So basically, if you were an experienced archer, you would pass, no problem. But it also showed us, is this guy real or not? And then if they became eligible for access to the Mass Deer Service network of properties, they would sit down with me, sign all the documents, and they would provide me with a $600 annual subscription fee.
But so before we move on to that part, so I want to get into that too. But so the interview was mainly it was mainly a proficiency test. It was, can you shoot? Does your equipment work? Was there any in-depth interview with them before you did the background checks and stuff? Was there any like one-on-one interviews, or were you looking for character flaws or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd sit down with them and just basically go through the contracts, the code of ethics.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what we expect you to do. We expect you to respect the properties. We expect you to leave the property better than, when you're finished.
Yes.
It's got to be clean, no lit, none of that garbage. Typical stuff that is just common sense and common courtesy.
Did you ever turn anybody away?
Yes, of course.
And for what reasons?
They couldn't hit the side of a barn from inside the barn. I mean, that's the main.
So besides proficiency, did you ever turn someone away because of, something you saw in their character or how they acted?
No, because, I mean, I guess the reality of the situation is that most of the people that were applying for the access were professional, family-oriented.
Well, and as is the case with most
people.
Hunters anyway,
Right.
I'm playing devil's advocate, seeing if there were any of the, the stereotypical, bad, bad hunters with the flannel, like you said, right? Who don't really have tact or might be rude or something,
right.
and you wouldn't want them
stinking like beer
on a property
at noon on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Those guys typically never made it to the interview. Those are the people that tended to badmouth Mass Deer Service.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I told you the example once at one of the local gun clubs. After a while with Mass Deer Service, oh, how does this guy get so many deer? He's got big deer. He's always he must be doing something bad.
Mm-hmm.
They're at the bar at noon on a Sunday, drinking beer and eating bacon and eggs, talking junk about me.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with beer and bacon and eggs, though.
No, but I've already been out in the woods scouting that day for 4 hours and putting cameras up and setting stands.
Yep.
And they're wondering, how do I get so many deer? Well, I've got good properties and I'm out in the woods, because there's no substitute for feet on the ground in the woods doing your stuff, doing your scouting.
Yeah.
So, let's say those people with those types of personalities never probably got to that point.
Now, after somebody became an assignee with you, and then we'll get back to like what you charged and get into that a little bit, because I know there's probably some misconceptions that you were just rolling in cash, right?
Right.
Some people don't understand all the ins and outs of starting a business and all the expenses and the work that goes into it.
Right.
Like when you break down the amount of hours you put into it, you're probably making $2 an hour. But we'll get.
I was losing money.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Did you ever get an assignee, like part of the program, and then you ended up kicking them out of the group for something that they did?
No. That was the point of really going through a thorough vetting and interview process.
So everybody behaved the right way.
Yeah, I never had any real issues with any of my guys, and it was limited. It wasn't like I had hundreds and hundreds of guys. Typically an annual network group would be anywhere between 20 and 35 guys when it was at its peak, and these guys loved it. Again, we were not trophy hunters. We were deer removal specialists, or I think I had a shirt that said deer abatement specialist. And this is, again, what rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially back then. And, we ended up, not by anything intentional, disrupting some of the I call them old timers, and disrupting their hunting. And they were pissed. I mean, really pissed. I mean,
it's understandable too.
I've been threatened. Some guy wanted to fight me over this because I had written permission on a private property, completely legitimate, and the guy puts up a tree stand during shotgun season 50 yards away on the property that I had permission that he didn't even know the owner.
He didn't have no.
And so I took the stand down and I gave it back to him. And he was like threatened, he was really, really pissed.
Yeah.
But
and you can get into those arguments, and when you have a gun in your hand, I've read stories of things that get out of control.
But he was completely in the wrong, and I've been hunting here for 20 years, and this and that. I said, well, you've been breaking the law for 20 years, and there was a budding conservation land, and they had another stand there. So
now, Massachusetts, you can hunt unposted property unless it was a town bylaw, right? Where there are certain towns you need landowner permission, written permission, but there is a state law that if it's unposted, you are allowed to hunt it, unless the town law is written against it, right?
Well, mostly in Zone 10.
Well, Zone 10 for sure. Where
It was most of the towns, and I didn't come across any towns that I hunted in that did not require landowners' permission documents.
Mm-hmm.
So he certainly didn't even know who the landowner was.
Yeah.
And so, I'd run into people like that. But we ended up policing areas for landowners. We've posted properties for them. Hey, I had hunters on here and I don't want them on it because I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, we'd be happy to post the property for you.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. They appreciated it. So, this is just getting into some of the negative stuff about it.
And what are the posted, real quick, what's the law for posting? Does it have to be, what are the distance between the posters? And because I know in Vermont, I haven't looked into it too much here. I don't own enough land to want to post it yet.
Right.
But in Vermont, you just have to, it's got to be renewed every year. You got to sign it and date it.
Yeah.
And there's some distance. But what's the law here? Do you know?
I can't.
You remember?
I don't remember. I didn't come across it all that often. We've done a couple properties, but basically just got the signs and tacked them up where we, right along the border of the property. But I didn't get into any of the details because to me, in my mind, which I don't, seems, accurate to me. If you have private property, you don't want people on there for, whether it's posted or not. It's my property. You need permission to be on my property or you're trespassing. Mm-hmm. But apparently that's not the rule in the state, in all areas. So that was kind of a shock to me. I just figured, hey, it's private property. You can't hunt here unless you have written permission.
Yeah.
But so that was weird to me.
My in-laws and my wife's from Kyrgyzstan, and they're of Russian descent, grew up in Kyrgyzstan. And over there, there's not real boundaries, and you can pretty much go everywhere. You're friendly with your neighbors. And so when my father-in-law first moved here, he's just he's bored in the middle of the day, doesn't speak much English, and looking for stuff to do, and goes for a walk in the state parks. And one day he comes back, he tells me, he's like, oh, I just walked all the way over here, saw a bunch of turkeys. He showed me on a map, and I was like, well, how'd you get there? He's like showed me where he walked. He walked through people's driveways. I was like, you can't do that here.
Yeah.
It's not, people have their private property. You can't just cross over their lines.
Right.
If somebody sees you going through their driveway, to get through you can't do that.
Well, at least he wasn't carrying a weapon.
No. Collecting mushrooms mostly.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it now. But so that was kind of the evolution of mass deer service. So.
All right, so then you were charging $600 for fees for a year, right?
That's right.
And I saw people, on the forums and stuff. Oh, he's going to turn it into, a rich man's sport where rich people get the best properties. And you can see that if you take it to the extreme and you expanded this thing, to the whole Northeast and you gobbled up all the properties, that can be a legitimate concern. So I can see if somebody takes it to the logical end, the same way that Airbnb came in and disrupted hotels and Uber came in and, killed the taxi industry, right? They are seeing you that way. I can see that as well. But, there is a sweet spot where you don't get too big and you're doing it the way that you want to do it. And talk about, how much you weren't making money, right?
No,
600 was covering your fees.
Yeah, the 600. I had, and back to the insurance or the liability issue. Just to be extra careful and have a little bit extra advantage in recruiting properties. I also purchased outdoor hunting insurance.
Yep.
And so that's an expense. And I think that was, $600 a year. And that would cover all the guys and all the properties.
All right.
At
so
that
one
size.
of your guys would cover that.
Yeah.
All right.
Plus, there was just it was maintenance. Equipment, the website, the printing stuff, just the marketing costs on an ongoing basis. When I established it as a corporation, there's taxes and there's corporate excise tax. There's an annual fee report. These aren't huge expenses, but they are expenses nonetheless. And so I wasn't making a living. I still had to have a day job and
Yeah.
support my family. And so, I used a lot of the money so that I could have decent clothes for myself and letter the truck. That was advertising as well. So yeah, I was not getting rich off this. And most of the time, let's say even at 20 guys, at $600, it's like 12 grand a year.
Yeah. Right.
So,
And how many hours were you spending?
oh gosh, I mean, back then I would start July 1st and it wasn't done until about February because there were stands that needed to be pulled down after the season. There was maintenance work. I mean, even right now, it's insane. I've managed to be able to start in September and end sometime in January. But it's just right now, the big thing that I've actually continued to take from Mass Deer Service is the fact that I own all these tree stands, although they're getting older. I have maintained good, long relationships with not a majority, but a good percentage of the network. And it's just now for me and my 4 or 5 buddies that are all on the permission slips. I was mentioning to you earlier, I get calls from old friends, hey, can I get into this spot? Can I go tomorrow? Can I do this? Well, maybe in the old days it was easier because we weren't held to the rules as much as we need to today. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying that in order for me to slide somebody into one of the tree stands that I have, I need to make contact with the landowner. I need to prepare another slip. I need to get their name on it. So it's not just, hey, slide in there. And
So back in the early days, you were letting people slide in fairness, and maybe that's where some people are, not calling you a sportsman or have a negative view.
Yes, but in the documents that the landowners signed at that point, it said Dan Wolf and or one of his assignees. Mm-hmm. So we didn't specify a name, and I don't know if the environmental police right now would consider that to be a legal thing.
Yep.
Because they are an assignee. Yes, that's true, but there's no specific name. So I don't know. We fortunately never had to deal
So
with
if somebody
that.
wanted to slide in, you would make them sign something that would show that they're an assignee of yours officially, or
Well,
just
today I tried.
Well, no, back in the day.
Well, no, anybody could under my authority. I guess that's
Yeah,
what the
so
landowner was
okay.
allowing me, the authority to assign an individual who they trust that I have already vetted that through
Yep.
that process, and then it would be okay. But I'm just not sure of the 100% legality of using the term assignee rather than a specific name.
Okay.
So, but fortunately, that never really became a big issue. So it's hard for me, Plus, now I'm so busy. I'm a small business owner in a somewhat related area with ticks, and it's just I just feel bad. But a lot of people do call me, and I wish they would stop.
So what are some of the other, let's keep going with what were some of the other negative accusations against you, and what's the truth about them?
Yeah. Well, the thing was, as I mentioned earlier, is that I just wanted to deer hunt. I didn't know anything about trophies and this and that, and I can tell you 100% for certain, if a deer presented a good shot to me, I would take it. And I didn't care if it was a little one or a big one or a doe or whatever. I cooked venison. I haven't eaten beef in my house in 15 years at least. I never purchase it. I'm just always eating venison. I love it. And so I didn't do and to this day, I don't use scents. I don't make mock scrapes and do all that stuff. I'm lucky enough to be able to have the time to be out there, and just the odds of just being out there are greater for me in some of these spots with deer that I've, big bucks, that it has allowed me to take some pretty impressive animals. But back in the beginning, whatever gave me the best shot came down, or I would take it. And
As that's part of your service too, and part of the arrangement. Is
Right.
People want deer removed, and you told me like they would get pissed if they thought somebody was only, I could see out back and there were some does and he didn't take a shot. Right?
Yeah, you remember that story that
Yeah.
I told you. That happened. One of my hunters was in a tree stand, off the backyard. Backyard. It was probably a 4 or 5 acre piece, but where the lawn meets the woods, where they see the deer all the time. And there were 3 does under the stand, and the hunter was waiting. And, the landowner was upset. She called me up. I thought you were here to take deer. This guy's sitting there, and he didn't even take the shot. I said, well, we need to respect that, because that's the only reason that we're allowed on their property. And that's what we have to do. We have to remove deer.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to kick us off, and then I won't have that spot to hunt, neither will any of the members, and I would lose that little bit of income on an annual basis. So that was the idea. I was lucky enough to be in the situation where a giant monster buck would show up and give me a shot opportunity before a doe, and that's why I would take it. Now, as I get older, it's changed a little bit. I have a strategy in mind now, because we're not doing it as a nuisance.
But you're still killing button bucks.
But
we can tell that story later. But
yeah, I will still do that. If I have the tags, I'm going to use the tags.
Yeah.
And I've always had an issue with the way the antlerless deer permitting system has been in this state. But you know what? I don't think anything's ever going to change unless we really all come together and as hunters and try to make those changes. But I don't know. First thing about the process, I would imagine there's some legal issues involved and hearings and all that stuff. And I just don't have time to do it right now. So I live with what it is, but I do have a problem with a lot of the unused tags. And one of the biologists told me once, this was a number of years ago, that at that time, only 13% of surplus tags were being reported. So that means 87% of those tags end up as garbage at the end of the season.
People were just gobbling them up and they're not using them.
Yeah, and I love it when people tell me, oh, you've already shot enough deer. What do you need another tag for? So, okay. That's like saying, oh, you've already made enough money. Stop earning. It boggles my mind that people, this is some of the negative stuff too. What are you doing in our area? Don't you have enough spots to hunt? I get that. And I say, you know what I do is none of your business. You hunt the way you want. I'm going to hunt the way I want. Everything I do is legit and legal and in accordance with the rules. So leave me alone, and I do. I still do kill does and small deer. It depends on where I am and what part of the season and what tags I have, and that's it. And I'm not going to apologize for any of that.
How many deer do you eat in a year? So you say you haven't eaten beef. I know some guys like, oh, one deer's fine, that's all we eat. But one deer doesn't last. If you're going to be eating it a lot, it doesn't last more than a month or two.
Yeah, I'm good for 5 or 6 deer a year myself.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I'm eating all of it. I have
give some away too.
Four people in my family. I cook all the time. I am a slow cooker madman.
You ever had heart goulash?
I'm not
that's what my mother-in-law just made.
That's awesome.
The deer I killed yesterday. Yeah. She's making all kinds of stuff that I would have never thought to do with venison.
Well, I do that too, but I have kielbasa made. We do ground. We do roasts, snack sticks. I got until this year, I had a great butcher out in Templeton that doesn't have the manpower, so we're making some shifts. But when I go to a friend's house, or my wife goes to visit her friends, we always come bearing gifts, whether it's a pound of burger or a steak or a package of kielbasa.
Right.
So between that and what we cook, I just cooked 6 pounds of jerky. It's in the dehydrator right now. So people, 6 deer, that's a lot of meat. Well, it is a lot of meat, but if you're cooking 6 pounds of this during the week and you've given out, 15 pounds of kielbasa or a burger, it goes pretty quick.
And do you have a lot of landowners that
Yeah.
like to eat deer, and you give them some of the?
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. I have been doing this for a long time. One thing we always offer the landowner, if they're interested, is venison. Now, either they would like a few steaks, or a couple of cuts, or a whole deer. That's if they get moved up on the list. But I do have a list of people that I give whole deer to, whether I drop it off at the butcher and they pick it up and pay for the processing, or they take the whole deer. That's up to them. I'm happy to do that for them. And I've had some guys for 20 years I've been giving deer to every single year. They expect it. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a problem with that. These guys, a lot of them are non-hunters, and they just love it. So 5 or 6 deer for me a year I go through. And my rule to myself is that when opening day starts on the following year, that all my freezers are empty.
Yeah.
So I'm incentivized to eat and distribute this venison because I love fresh venison.
And if you got a full deer left and you only got a week, what do? Throw a party, have people over?
Well, I'll get nervous at the end of September, and we'll start cooking like crazy, or we'll provide that meat to a friend. So when the day one, my freezers are empty, so that means I got to get more deer.
Yeah.
So that gives me motivation as well. And, there have been, depending on the doe permits available and how many I can get, there have been years where I've taken 15 deer. Mm-hmm. I took more than that one year when I was hunting in Connecticut, New York, and Mass. Closer to 20 deer. So 5 or 6 myself, everybody gets venison. And, they like it.
Yep.
But yeah, I've been called a disgrace to the hunting world. Some guy I didn't even know, I was at Bass Pro Shop. I don't know what I was doing, but I was telling the guy at the bow counter, about mass deer service. Again, this is years ago. Yeah, but we're slaughtering all the deer. We don't care. But these are the traditionalists, and I respect what they do. But we're not in the woods of Western New York here. We're in Weston, Mass. We're in Dover, Mass, in residential areas where the numbers are just skyrocketing, and the ticks and the vehicle collisions and all that stuff.
It's because there's not enough, hunters to help manage the population. There's big coyote populations, and coyotes kill deer, but mainly fawns. Mm-hmm. They'll pick off some fawns, but I think the average person doesn't realize that every doe has 2.
Nowadays,
at least
yeah.
2, sometimes triplets.
Yep. I've seen quadruplets.
Yep. In Vermont, it's 1 a lot of the times, but it depends on where you're at. There's a lot of good nutrition around here and low pressure and stuff, and easy winters.
The pressure is going up, and I think must have been Andover. I may be incorrect on this, but I think Andover and Sudbury were one of the first couple of towns to implement a conservation management program. And these are becoming more popular. And they're recognizing the destructive nature of the increase of population. And so they're, and I don't want to say that they've modeled their programs after mass deer service as far as the application process, the vetting process, the proficiency, but it seems very similar. Mm-hmm. And I've actually volunteered and helped a lot of these groups. So currently, I'm, as a hunter and a helper in the town of Weston, the town of Hingham, Sudbury Valley Trustees, and the town of Sudbury Conservation in those programs. And, I think in Dover what's happened, in particular, I don't know if anybody out there knows a lot about Dover, but like I was saying before, there was just herds of deer. It was crazy, the amount of deer there. They've had their program in for many years now. I have to think it's close to 10-ish. And now there's 60 town-sponsored hunters on the conservation land, and I've seen a huge decrease in the population of deer. So from their perspective, what they're doing is working very well. From my perspective, we love to see a lot of deer, and I understand.
See, now you're getting to the traditionalist original gripe with you, right?
Well, listen, the thing about what I do is I accept the fact that things change, and I try to change with it. So most of my time used to be about probably 80% of my time was spent in Dover back in the early days, and now it's probably 10% because it's just, I don't want to go where I'm not going to see deer or get the opportunities. So that's kind of the shift, and it's great, good job on their part. But there's probably now, I would say 30 or 40 additional hunters outside of the conservation program. So you're talking close to 100 hunters in that town, and it's inevitable.
So there's a break even point. There's some line, right, where it's like you want the population to get to this level, and that's good for a lot of things. It's good for the deer herd and their health. It's good for keeping ticks down. It's good for less vehicle collisions, and it's good for landowners not getting their shrubs destroyed and all that stuff, right? Once you get to that certain level. But there is the point where in the beginning it's great for the hunter because you see a lot of deer, there's a lot more action, and you are going in there with the goal to help out, right? But then once you get down to that level, it's like, all right, now this is just like an average place to hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still deer there for sure.
Oh yeah. And more than like Vermont where I go to hunt. So
like I said, I've been spoiled because I didn't know anything else. I mean, I was hunting in Ithaca, the Ithaca area in Elmira, New York. You drive down at night, you look in the fields, there's 30 deer. And I mean, some of those areas were crazy. So that's all I've known. So I'm not the guy that's going to take a walk with his shotgun, starting at sunup and come back at sundown. I just don't do that. I mean, and that's another reason that maybe certain traditionalists are not too impressed with what I've done. I joke a lot when I say, if you can't see your truck from your stand, you're in too far. I mean, it's a joke, but it's at some point as I'm getting older, it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So
everybody knows you got to be 100 feet or 150 feet.
Well, I'm talking from the driveway.
Yeah.
I don't park on the roads. These are private spots.
Right.
So
right.
From the driveways or wherever your designated parking areas are.
Yeah.
So the other thing we could talk about too, if you want, is just the increase of law enforcement involved in particularly these more suburban areas.
Let's do, because I know you and I had a little bit of a not disagreement, but the only run-in I've ever had with an EPO in Massachusetts was I actually drove to their headquarters because my dad was coming down from Vermont to hunt, and he uses a crossbow, and I didn't realize until about the week before that he's got to go through a long process to get approved for his crossbow license here, even though it doesn't transfer from Vermont. He's got to show all this proof. So I'm scrambling because we took time off, vacation. We were talking about it all summer. Couldn't wait to get him down here. He's never got a deer with his bow, and I was set on getting him a deer. And so all this is happening, and I'm scrambling, and I'm making phone calls. I call a mass fish hunt. Nobody answered, and nobody was at their headquarters because of COVID. Everybody's working from home because I drove to their headquarters first. Completely closed. Then I realized that on the way there, I passed the EPO headquarters, and I pulled in there right after leaving. Mass Fish Hunt pulled in there, knocked on the door. They looked at me like, I don't think anyone ever goes to that front porch.
Right.
And had my mask on. They opened it, had a great conversation through the screen, told them the problem. They pulled some strength. I mean, they were like, look, we'll try to do whatever we can to help you. And they took my phone number down. They made some phone calls. The chief followed up with me many times and said, hey, here's who you need to talk to. I've told her about your situation. She's going to see what she can do. All that stuff. It ended up working out, and they were really, really great communicators with me. And I think, as with like any police force and any authority, as long as you are following the laws and you treat them with respect, and there's a mutual respect between the sportsman and the law enforcement officer, then you're going to have good interactions. Now, there may be some, exceptions to that rule, and I think you might have had different experiences, and if you want to talk through some of those, yeah, please.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into too many details regarding, my opinions and my thoughts and my actual experiences. But if I could shed some light on what I've learned over the years, coming from a time when we never saw EPOs and, without implicating anything or implying anything, maybe it was a little looser as far as, all of the rules and regulations.
And look, I know about that too because I grew up in a Vermont deer camp, and the old jokes from the old timer, my dad and my uncle and all the older guys there now, they never participated in any of the old stories from my grandfather and his friends who started that camp in the 50s.
Right.
They would drink a lot, smoke a lot in camp, play cards, not get up and go hunting, and then they go, we need a deer, and they might go out at night and shoot a deer, and that was it was a sign of the times. Things have totally changed. Definitely do not advocate ever doing anything like that.
And I agree with that. I've just learned, and I'm not saying that I participated in any egregious acts, but sometimes some people, back then, maybe they didn't wear their orange cap in their tree stand, or maybe they didn't, maybe they were 490 feet away from the dwelling, an occupied dwelling in use, or something like that. I mean, I'm just talking about these little minor things. But what I also found out, and I can't confirm 100%, was that the negative side of mass deer service, there were individuals that I believe, and I'm speculating, but based upon evidence, that would call in anonymously to the EPOs and accuse me and my guys of certain things, whether it be baiting or shooting at night or with spotlights and all that stuff. All of that stuff, I can tell you, it was not true on my part. Again, I can't control the actions of an individual that's out. All I know is that, everybody signed a code of ethics stating they would be following the rules. So these types of things. So my advice to people is that it's just not worth it to get in trouble, because I believe pretty strongly that the EPOs are out there to do their job as they see it, as they interpret it. And, there might be great guys out there, but there's also guys out there that I think may, how should I put this, may want to be looking for these indiscretions and want to take it to the full extent of the law.
Yeah.
And so it's just not worth it. I mean, it's just not worth it.
And we got to remember, and I think I kind of come down on the stance on the side of EPOs and game wardens in Vermont and stuff, because I've been to Kyrgyzstan, where my wife's from, I mentioned, and over there's hardly any game anywhere. The rivers are barren of fish. There's like really no great hunting, and they've got all this wilderness and 25,000-foot mountains that just surround the entire country. And they don't. And my father-in-law showed me a video when I went and first met him last summer. We went over there, and he was showing me all these old videos, and he was getting a kick out of this one. They went camping. They drove way into the mountains, and they went camp next to a river, and they wanted some fish, and they threw dynamite into the river and blew up the river, and then scooped up the fish that rose to the top. And that's because there is no regulation there. So that's the other end of the spectrum. When you have no regulation, it's one of the best things that America has ever done is early on in the days and starting conservation is putting laws and rules in place that are going to ensure the survivability of all these species that we're so lucky to be able to go hunt and fish, right? Yeah. So that is what the goal is, right? And if you're an optimistic, you're optimistic and you think, the best in scenarios, then you want to believe that everyone, and that's the whole goal, and everybody on enforcement side, and that's all they're trying to do. Now, again, I know that when you become a police officer, just like with hunters, there are some bad apples that can ruin
absolutely
your perception for the whole bunch.
Yeah,
right.
I agree with that 100%. There's bad people everywhere in every profession and every all sides.
We see that with across America too, with without getting too deep into stuff, but race riots and all that stuff that's going on because there are some bad apples, and then they get all the publicity, and that's all people are talking about are the bad apples.
Right,
can ruin it.
I get it, and so hearing that people were calling in, and
but was there ever an instance that you said no, you didn't, and you're not responsible, or you can't really keep an eye on every person and what they're doing. They're all, individually responsible for their own actions. But was there a time, you don't have to go into big details, that somebody did do one of those things, shooting at night or baiting, one of the more serious accusations?
No, not that I know of. And if there was, the individual didn't disclose it to me directly. But, I've had EPOs waiting for me to get out of the woods. I used to have a black Chevy truck with Mass Deer Service on it, and parking near a road. I guess they saw it and waited to grill me and made some accusations that were not true, that were later proved to be false in court. Things like hunting too close to a neighbor's house who had given me permission. That neighbor actually accused them of lying to him in an affidavit. And I didn't really know this guy. He was just a neighbor. He said, I don't want you on my property, but you can be on the neighbor's property within 500 feet. So that was one issue. I've had them come up on me in stand in the middle of a hunt, get out of the tree and let me check your hunting license. I'm like, this is hunter harassment, in my opinion. You can wait until I'm done, but why are you coming at 3:30 in the afternoon, just getting to prime time and doing as he called it, a random hunting check? So I've been on the radar. I don't like it, so I am extra careful. I do everything in my power and I know the rules by now pretty well, to maintain that. So I don't want to, and these guys were just sort of, looking for the trophy. And the Mass Deer Service was a trophy at one point. So, I can't tell you what goes on in their heads, but, I had property seized, which was later returned. And everything that was in the past. And that was kind of the impetus for the dissolution of Mass Deer Service 4 or 5 years ago, probably 5 years ago. It was just too much. It was too much stress managing these guys. Everyone's complaining, if they don't see enough deer, they didn't get a deer, it's my fault. And why did you put them on a crappy spot? And, who needs that? I was too much going on in my life. I wasn't making money, so I ended up just closing it all down and just keeping to myself with my buddies with a low profile. And today we just have we have the opportunities, we have the spots, we get a ton of deer, everybody's happy, and it's a much more peaceful life for me now. I do what I want to do, and I try to help when I can.
You're kind of like a retired gangster.
Well, not necessarily.
No, it's like the vibe. It's like, I went through all this bull.
It's been a long road.
But now it's it's just a couple of guys smoking cigars.
Yeah, well, I'd like to live off the fruits of my labor now. I'm sort of just coasting away with with that empire that I spent so much time and effort to build, and I believe that for the rest of my life, I'll have a nice, close place to hunt where I'll be able to get meat and trophies and just do what I want.
Yep.
And just leave me alone. I'm going to behave and be a good boy and do what I love.
Great. Well, is there anything else you want to say about Mass Deer Service before we can?
Well, no. I'm glad you gave me this opportunity to really tell you that there's still going to be people out there that are going to be probably calling BS on what I'm saying here, but this is the truth. I have no reason. There's no implications now. It's over. It's done with. But that's really what it was, and it was only done with the intention of trying to make enough money to support my expensive habit. As every hunter knows, hunting is an expensive habit. Help my friends out and just enjoy ourselves, and that was really the ultimate or the initial goal. And it just got a little out of hand as far as the management side of things. So I'm happy where we are now. We always have a good time, and we're just enjoying it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for that, and we'll end this one, and we'll talk about some ticks.
All right.
All right.
My second favorite topic.
Thanks for listening to the Hunt Suburbia podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We're going to release an episode every single Sunday throughout the season, throughout the entire year, and we will possibly be releasing some bonus episodes here and there throughout the week as people, come in freshly off a bow kill and tell their stories. We hope that happens throughout the season. There might be weeks where you get 2 or 3 bonus episodes. You might not get one for a couple of weeks, but there will be some bonus episodes. But you can count on us every single Sunday to have a new interview on throughout the season. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Big bucks I've been dreaming often, every night till I'm in a coffin. Vermont woods to the burbs of Boston, I'm looking for a tree to get lost in. Crisp mornings, little dust in the snow. Quality time, just me and my bow. Fall evenings, I know just where to go for some quality times for me and my bow. It's just me and my bow.